You were born 1972.
Yes,
So you've been married since you were 34, which is a viable time to get pregnant if you want to get pregnant. But
right.
it's kind of flirting with the advanced maternal age or the geriatric pregnancy that starts, I guess, at 35. Okay, so you just didn't want children?
Well, when my husband is 10 years older than I am,
Gotcha.
and at the time I was teaching elementary school. I had flirted with it in my 20s. Do I want kids? Do I not want kids? And then I was like, I just never had that overwhelming desire.
Hmm.
Um, and then when my mom was sick with cancer, I was like, oh, I need to have kids. And, that's before I met Rick.
Hmm.
But that wasn't, I knew what that was. That was just one of those passing, continue life kind of things. But I was also having horrendous periods. And, that just, they were horrible, painful, went on for weeks. And when Rick and I started dating, when he was talking about moving back to Georgia because he was living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time. And he was like, "Are you sure?" He goes, "I'm older, so I don't necessarily want kids."
Hmm.
And I was like, "I'm really okay with that." I thought, once you say the words no, but yeah, it was okay. It was just like part of it was selfish, to give up because I know what kind of time that takes.
Right.
Um, and part of it was just not having that need
Mhm.
um, to nurture because I nurtured all day long. So,
Right.
I didn't, and kudos to people who can do that. But
Mhm.
I know where I knew back then that if I was giving all day, I just didn't have a lot to give when I got home. So, yeah, I mean, it was intentional. It wasn't like something that just kind of slid by and it was like, oh, I'm out of time. And because as soon as they were going to let me have a hysterectomy, I was having one. So,
And what did it take to get them to let you have a
yeah.
hysterectomy?
Well, part of it was they were trying other things. They wanted to make sure that there wasn't something else that I could do, just in case I changed my mind. And my doctor she's female, but she was like, I just don't want, we were talking in my late 20s at the time, but she goes, I just don't want you to change your mind once you do get married. And I said, I understand. So we had tried some other things. But once I was married and I was like, I know this is what she was like, that was fine. Then we just scheduled it. I was mad at her at first for saying, I just don't want, I get it, but I guess she had seen enough that she didn't want me to regret that decision. So, it was fine. But I was so ready. Well, as soon as it was on the table,
Right.
I was like, yes, we're doing it.
Right.
And my mom had had a full one, my grandmother had had a full one, and I just had to have a partial.
They had gotten married in a different time. They had had children, obviously, since one
Right.
came from the other and you came from one. And then they were young-ish, 30 or whatever, and their doctors were like, "Yeah, you're clearly in pain a lot and this ain't working and you already have kids, so we'll just do it," right? Is
Well,
that
my mom she was in her 40s when she had hers.
okay?
And yeah, hers was also related to low iron from heavy bleeding.
Right.
And I don't remember what my grandmother's was from,
Hmm.
but it was also probably in her 40s
Hmm.
when
Okay.
they had them.
So you were a little bit early, but at least 35.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There's so many reasons, and women just aren't asked.
No, they're not. And well, some people will ask, "Oh, why didn't you ever have children?" Like, well, it's like it's the natural progression of things. So why didn't you? Especially in the South, you see that.
Don't you want to be normal?
Yeah, right. I don't get offended by it. I know that there are some women who do, and a lot of that's because of the circumstances that led to their not having children. But I think my grandmother was probably upset, that I didn't, and I know my dad was. Um, he never said it, but it was just the things, he wanted grandkids, but yeah, it was, I mean, it just was. And what I found is it's interesting when you said that, I started thinking a couple years ago at my last college reunion, we were talking about how many of us don't have kids. And it is really amazing. I went to an all women's college, so my numbers are a little, I have more women around me to ask and talk to about it. But
Right?
yeah, there were a lot of us that didn't have kids. And
Mhm.
it is, you just generationally, I'm wondering if that is a big difference.
I think when we were young, we were kind of brought up to think, oh, well, this is normal and this is what you do. But then you have to think about like, well, our moms couldn't even open their own bank accounts. They had
Right.
a husband or a dad. So, yeah, they could have done life differently, but life really wasn't pointing them in that direction. I think there's some resentment from people who have more of a classical view of the family and a classical view of like women's roles that we don't have those constraints.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're cognizant that we don't have those constraints. They're just like we don't behave that same way anymore. And it's like, well, we don't have to, right? You chose somebody to marry when you were in your 30s. I chose someone to marry in my early 40s. That was not normal. That's not even normal for our I mean, you more than me. That you had the more normal time frame than I did. But, but by the time you get to be 35, you've already seen some friends marry and divorce.
Oh, yeah.
And so it kind of makes you more cautious about your own choices if you've gone that far without making a selection of your own.
I had, when I met Rick, I kind of had been at the point where I was okay being single. It
Mhm.
was like, I mean, yes, I was poor because I was a teacher, but I was okay with that, scraping by just because the dating pool was, not what I wanted. And um especially locally. I mean, I would have had to have probably left this area to, I mean, that's ended up, this was an introduction. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think a lot of women are realizing I'm not settling for anything. And,
Mhm.
I'm going to be very happy with myself and then work on finding a mate. And I think some women, if they have the money, choose to do it on their own. We don't see that a lot in West Georgia. Um, and I think that it's just like, having children out of wedlock now. We see that more, which I'm, fine. You don't have to have that. But I would like to see more women taking control and realizing I don't have to have that husband just to have the family that I want.
But there's the problem with that is like you said, like you have to be well off in order to
Right.
do that. You can't just, I mean, there's plenty of people who have through, possibly an accident where the husband died or a divorce or some other sort of situation. They weren't planning on being single moms, but they're single moms. And they're not probably going to go out of their way to have more children at that
Right.
point.
Oh no,
You
absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
there's also the issue of equity in the home, like who's cleaning, who's buying things, who's cooking, who's managing the cars, who's managing the money. And a lot of it does fall to women,
Yes.
except for when it doesn't. Sometimes the men kind of like keep the money a secret, which I don't allow in my life.
Yeah.
But some marriages are like that. And, there's kind of these specialized roles, but the men don't take on the heavy lifting with child rearing
Yeah.
necessarily. I mean, often. That kind of work is unpaid. If you don't take on unpaid, unappreciated work, which is parenting, and you don't do the lion's share of it because you're a woman, and that's selfish and that's narcissistic. But that's based on the idea that women will work for free in order to have children. Our labor doesn't equal anything. You know what I mean? When it comes
Right.
to taking care of children. And obviously, you're going to probably have some feelings about that as someone who looks after children every day. And there is an economic value to educating the children. There is an economic value to maintaining a household, but you don't see it, and it's not acknowledged necessarily by men
Right.
unless their wife dies and suddenly they have to have everything done by someone who comes in their house. You know, somebody's going to come clean, somebody's going to come do the laundry, somebody's going to cook. Suddenly they're out thousands of dollars for the value that they had when they lived with a woman. And so adding parenting to this already skewed dynamic between men and women just seems like,
I think the younger generations are doing a better job about the parenting roles. Um,
yeah.
in general, our generation is still stuck in those sort of traditional roles, and
Hmm.
they don't say, I have to babysit my kids, or, oh, you've got a baby. When somebody says something to the dad, they don't do that as much as people used to. But yeah, I think our generation still has those pretty straight expectations for mom and dad. But I do see a lot of the younger, especially there's a couple of guys that I work with at the middle school, and seeing them as dads is very different than the people that, I know now, even
Hmm.
that are
That's
our age.
hmm
So
It,
hopefully we're going to see change with that. But then you've got, asshats like the bloggers and the influencers that are just idiots. I mean, they just are.
but it bothers me that I know that so many young men are kind of turning against young women. You know what I mean?
Right. They are. And there's a lot of perpetuating that too with
Hmm.
older generations.